You're going to head
Armed
straight down
police
this street,
officer,
then
I'm
take the second
withdrawing your
left
right be
past the
here,
fountain.
and you
So
can
straight, then
blame
the
him,
second left? That's
disrespectful
correct. It's
tourist.
right next to the museum.
Tourists walked in groups, taking photos of the tall buildings, colorful shops, and the historic monuments that decorated the city center. Among them was a young man named Daniel, a visitor from another country, who had been excitedly planning this trip for months. He carried a small backpack, a camera hanging around his neck, and a confident air, eager to see and explore everything at once. Daniel had read a lot about the city online. He knew it had strict laws and a strong police presence, but in his excitement, he didn't think much about how closely the rules were followed. To him, being a tourist meant he could see everything freely, speak to anyone, and take pictures wherever he wanted. He didn't notice that the local people moved with a quiet respect for rules, following instructions from signs and officers without hesitation. As Daniel wandered into a busy public square, he was amazed by the energy of the city. Street performers were entertaining crowds, musicians played lively tunes, and small vendors were selling snacks, souvenirs, and handcrafted items. People were smiling, chatting, and enjoying the morning. Daniel pulled out his camera and started filming everything, moving quickly from one place to another. He didn't stop to ask permission or notice the signs around the square that warned visitors about filming sensitive areas. Nearby, two armed police officers patrolled the square. They wore neat uniforms, carried radios, and kept a careful watch on the crowd. Their presence was calm but noticeable, and people naturally gave them space. They were used to tourists wandering around, but they also knew that some visitors didn't always follow the rules. Daniel didn't notice the officers at first. He was too focused on capturing every detail of the city through his lens. He laughed at the street performers, asked strangers to pose for photos without asking properly, and even joked loudly about the strictness of the city's rules. Some local people nearby glanced at him, frowning slightly. They were polite, but they were also cautious, knowing that tourists sometimes caused small problems without realizing it. After a few minutes, one of the officers started walking closer to Daniel. He had observed the young man for some time. Daniel was filming areas that were not allowed, talking loudly in a way that attracted attention, and ignoring polite requests from local shopkeepers. The officer, experienced and calm, knew he needed to address the situation before it got out of control. "Sir," the officer called gently but firmly, walking up to Daniel, "please stop filming here. This area is restricted for safety reasons." Daniel turned around, slightly startled, but then smiled and waved. "Oh, don't worry, I'm just taking some pictures." "I won't be a problem," he said. He laughed lightly, thinking it was a casual warning that he could ignore. The officer didn't respond with anger or frustration. He was trained to stay calm and professional. "I understand," he said, "but the rules are strict. You need to stop filming immediately and follow the instructions. This is not a suggestion." Daniel chuckled again, thinking the officer was just trying to scare him. "Come on, it's just a camera. I'm a tourist. People take pictures everywhere," he said. His voice carried across the square, drawing the attention of nearby pedestrians. Some stopped to watch, sensing tension in the air. The officer maintained a steady, respectful tone. Being a tourist does not give anyone the right to break local rules. You are in a public space, and safety regulations are important. Please cooperate. Daniel shrugged and continued filming, moving a few steps to get a better angle. He didn't realize that his actions were now attracting more attention from other officers in the area. A second officer was approaching quietly, observing the situation to make sure it didn't escalate. At this point, some local citizens started feeling uncomfortable. Parents pulled their children closer, and small groups of people shifted their positions to maintain distance. Nobody wanted a scene, but everyone could sense that Daniel's behavior was not respectful of the rules that the city had put in place to ensure order and safety. Daniel, however, remained unaware of the growing tension. He raised his camera to film a group of officers patrolling the square, joking loudly, "Look at them. So serious. I guess they don't know how to have fun." His words, intended to be humorous, were now clearly disrespectful in the eyes of the authorities. The first officer took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Sir," he said again, his voice calm but firmer this time, "I must insist that you stop what you are doing. Your actions are disturbing public order and you are not following instructions." Daniel laughed nervously. "Relax, I'm just having some fun. It's not a big deal," he said. But the officer could see that Daniel did not understand the seriousness of the situation. He was testing limits and ignoring repeated warnings, which could lead to consequences if not addressed immediately. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Some people were curious, while others looked concerned. Tourists and locals alike whispered among themselves, watching how the situation would unfold. The atmosphere, which had been lively and cheerful, was now tense. The officer signaled slightly to the second officer, indicating that he might need backup if Daniel continued to ignore instructions. He did not want to escalate unnecessarily, but he also knew that in a busy public area, one person's careless behavior could quickly create bigger problems. Daniel, still unaware of the danger he was putting himself in, continued to move around, filming and speaking loudly to people passing by. His confidence seemed unshakable. He was enjoying the attention, thinking it was all part of the excitement of travel. He didn't notice how the crowd was beginning to close in slightly, making space for the officers to act if necessary. The officer sighed quietly, then spoke again, clearly and firmly. "Sir, this is your final warning. You need to stop filming and follow the rules immediately. Failure to do so may result in serious consequences." Daniel paused for a moment, finally realizing that this was not a casual request. He looked around, noticing the serious expressions on the officers' faces and the quiet attention of the surrounding crowd. A feeling of unease began to settle in. For the first time, he understood that this was not a joke and that his actions might have real consequences. Despite this, Daniel tried to argue, raising his hands and smiling nervously. "I'm just trying to enjoy the city." "I didn't mean any trouble," he said, but the officer remained calm, showing that words alone would not solve the problem. Actions were now required. This moment marked the beginning of a turning point. Daniel's excitement and confidence were meeting the reality of strict rules and experienced law enforcement. What he had thought would be a carefree morning of sightseeing was turning into a serious lesson about respect, rules, and understanding the culture and laws of a country he was visiting. As the officer prepared to take further steps, Daniel's nervous laughter faded. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, sensing judgment and concern. For the first time, he realized that being a visitor did not make him above the rules. Respect, cooperation, and careful observation of the laws were essential, even for someone just trying to enjoy their trip. The morning that had started with bright sun and cheerful excitement was now filled with tension, uncertainty, and an important lesson waiting to be learned. Daniel's journey in this city was just beginning, but it was already shaping into a story he would never forget. A story about respect, authority, and understanding the world beyond one's own expectations. Daniel could feel the tension rising as the officer watched him closely. The cheerful energy of the morning had vanished, replaced by an uneasy silence. People in the square now moved around more cautiously, keeping their distance. The realization began to sink in. This was no ordinary city stroll. The rules were strict and authority was serious. He glanced at the officer, noticing the calm, measured way he stood. The officer wasn't angry or aggressive, but he radiated authority. It was clear he expected full cooperation. Daniel tried to force a smile, hoping to lighten the mood, but it came out nervous and awkward. He raised his camera slightly, pretending to adjust it, but the officer's sharp eyes followed every movement. "Sir," the officer said, his voice calm but firm, "you must stop filming immediately. You are not allowed to continue in this area. Please cooperate." Daniel swallowed nervously. I'm just taking a few more pictures," he said, trying to sound casual. "It won't take long." The officer shook his head slightly. "You have already been warned. This is your final notice. Your behavior is disrupting public order. You need to comply now." At this moment, Daniel noticed another officer approaching quietly from the side. Backup had arrived, but they didn't rush or make any sudden moves. Their presence was enough to show that the situation was serious. Daniel's confident facade began to crumble. He tried to reason with himself. "It's just a small misunderstanding. I didn't mean any harm," but deep down he knew he had been careless. The city's rules were not suggestions, they were laws, and ignoring them could lead to consequences. Some bystanders whispered among themselves. A few tourists shook their heads, sensing that Daniel had gone too far. Local citizens watched quietly, showing respect for the officers and understanding the importance of following rules. Daniel felt their eyes on him, and it made him more anxious. He lowered his camera, realizing that continuing to film could make the situation worse. Okay, he said quickly. "I'll stop." The officer nodded but didn't relax his posture. "Good. Now please step aside and follow me. We need to resolve this matter calmly." Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should argue or comply. His pride wanted him to resist, to defend himself, but his common sense told him to cooperate. Slowly, he began walking alongside the officer, noticing the other officer who had been observing from a distance. The city felt different now, less like a place to explore freely and more like a place where rules mattered deeply. As they moved through the square, Daniel noticed the expressions of the people around him. Some looked curious, some concerned, but all were quietly observing. He realized that his behavior had attracted attention, not for excitement or admiration, but because it was unusual and inappropriate in this context. The officer led him to a quieter area of the square, away from the crowds. Daniel could feel his heart racing, and he tried to calm himself. The officer didn't speak immediately, allowing him a moment to understand the seriousness of the situation. Finally, the officer said, "Sir, you must understand that being in a foreign country comes with responsibilities. You cannot act as if the rules don't apply to you. Respect and cooperation are essential." Daniel nodded, realizing the truth in the officer's words. I understand now," he said, his voice quieter than before. "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. I wasn't careful." The officer studied him for a moment, then continued. "Intentions are not enough. Actions have consequences. Ignoring instructions, filming restricted areas, and making loud, disruptive remarks can create serious problems. You were given several warnings, yet you continued." Daniel felt a wave of regret. He had been so excited to explore, so confident in his freedom as a tourist, that he had forgotten to consider the rules of the city. The lesson was becoming very clear. Respect for authority and local laws was not optional. The officer's calm demeanor made the words feel heavier. It wasn't anger or punishment, it was responsibility. Daniel realized that the officer was trying to teach him, to show him the proper way to behave, not just to scold him. "Can you explain why you acted this way?" the officer asked, his tone serious but not hostile. Daniel paused. I guess I thought I could do whatever I wanted. I wanted to capture everything, see everything, and enjoy my trip. I didn't think about how my actions affected others or about the rules I needed to follow." The officer nodded. Many visitors make the same mistake. Excitement can cloud judgment, but understanding the rules and respecting them ensures everyone's safety and comfort. It's important to learn from this experience. As Daniel listened, he noticed that his nervousness was slowly changing into reflection. He began to see the situation from a new perspective, not as a restriction on his freedom, but as a structure that kept the city safe and orderly. He realized that respect was not just about avoiding punishment. It was about understanding and valuing the community he was visiting. The officer continued, explaining the importance of public order, safety regulations, and the responsibilities of visitors. He spoke about the role of the police in maintaining peace and helping people enjoy the city safely. Daniel listened carefully, absorbing every word. For the first time, he truly understood the balance between freedom and responsibility. Meanwhile, the small crowd that had gathered earlier began to disperse. People returned to their routines, watching from a distance but no longer worried. The tension in the air slowly lifted, replaced by quiet normalcy. Daniel realized that his actions had affected not just himself, but the people around him. The lesson was bigger than he had imagined. After a few minutes, the officer gave him a final instruction. You may continue your visit, but only if you follow the rules. No filming in restricted areas, no loud or disrespectful remarks, and full cooperation with officers is required. Do you understand? Daniel nodded earnestly. Yes, I understand completely. I will follow the rules. The officer's expression softened slightly. Good. Remember, respect is the key, not just for the city, but for the people who live here and for yourself. Enjoy your visit safely and responsibly. Daniel felt a sense of relief but also a lasting impression. The encounter had been stressful, but it had taught him a lesson he would not forget. He realized that travel was not just about seeing new places. It was about understanding cultures, respecting laws, and learning from experiences. As he walked back into the square, camera now safely in his bag, he observed the city with new eyes. The vibrant streets, the colorful shops, and the busy crowds no longer seemed chaotic. Instead, they appeared as a living system, orderly and interconnected, sustained by rules and respect. He also noticed the officers walking through the square, maintaining order quietly and professionally. Their presence, which had once felt intimidating, now seemed reassuring. Daniel understood that their role was not to restrict freedom unnecessarily, but to ensure that everyone could enjoy the city safely. The morning continued, but Daniel's perspective had changed completely. He began to explore more carefully, asking for permission before taking photos, speaking politely to locals, and following signs and instructions diligently. He realized that travel required patience, mindfulness, and a willingness to adapt. By the end of the morning, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and reflection. He had learned an important lesson about behavior, respect, and responsibility. What had started as a routine sightseeing trip had transformed into a powerful learning experience. He knew that the rest of his visit would be shaped by this understanding, making him a more thoughtful and considerate traveler. As he left the square and walked toward the next destination, he glanced back briefly. The officers were still there, observing calmly, ensuring order. Daniel smiled quietly to himself, grateful for the encounter that had taught him so much. The city continued around him, alive with energy and life. But now, Daniel moved with awareness, respect, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a visitor in a new place. The lesson from that morning would stay with him long after the trip was over, shaping the way he traveled, behaved, and connected with the world around him. The afternoon sun was warm and bright, but Daniel no longer felt the carefree excitement he had earlier that morning. Instead, he felt a quiet tension, a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. He had learned an important lesson about respect, rules, and authority, but the memory of the encounter with the officers still lingered in his mind. Every step he took through the busy streets reminded him that he was in a city where order and law were taken very seriously. Daniel walked slowly, taking in the sights with more care than before. He noticed the small details he had overlooked during his initial excitement. The signs directing pedestrians, the markings on the streets, and the subtle ways people moved to maintain harmony. He realized that the city's beauty was not just in its architecture or streets, but in the way it functioned smoothly, guided by rules and respect for one another. As he turned a corner, he spotted the same officer from earlier. The officer was patrolling calmly, observing the crowd with a careful eye. Daniel felt a twinge of nervousness, unsure if the officer would approach him again. But to his relief, the officer simply nodded once as they passed, a gesture that was neither threatening nor dismissive. It was as if the officer was reminding Daniel silently, "Remember what you learned." Daniel decided to visit a small cafe nearby, hoping to rest and reflect on the morning's events. He ordered a cup of tea and found a seat by the window, watching the busy street outside. People passed by in a steady flow, families, office workers, students, and tourists like him. He noticed how everyone seemed to move with purpose, yet without rushing, respecting personal space and following rules instinctively. Sitting there, Daniel's mind wandered back to his earlier behavior. He had laughed and joked loudly, ignored signs, and taken pictures without permission. At the time, he had thought it was harmless fun, but now he understood the potential consequences of his actions. It was not just about breaking rules. It was about disrupting the harmony of a community and making people feel unsafe or uncomfortable. He reflected on the officer's words. Intentions are not enough. Actions have consequences. Daniel realized how true that was. Even though he had not meant any harm, his actions had consequences that affected both himself and those around him. The realization made him feel a deep sense of responsibility, not fear, but awareness. After finishing his tea, Daniel decided to continue exploring, but this time with mindfulness. He pulled out a small notebook to jot down his thoughts and observations. He wrote about how people in the city respected rules, how officers performed their duties calmly, and how tourists like him needed to adapt to local customs and laws. He hoped that keeping these notes would help him remember the lessons he was learning. As he walked through a narrow street lined with small shops, Daniel noticed a group of other tourists taking pictures without paying attention to the rules. They were standing in the middle of the walkway, laughing loudly and blocking pedestrians. Daniel felt a mix of concern and responsibility. He knew exactly how the officers might respond if their actions continued. He approached them politely. "Excuse me," he said, trying to sound friendly but firm. "You should be careful here. Some areas are restricted and the officers take it very seriously. It's better to follow the rules to avoid problems." The group looked surprised at first, but then nodded. "Thanks," one of them said. "We didn't know." Daniel felt a small sense of satisfaction, realizing that he could share his experience to help others avoid mistakes. It reminded him that learning from mistakes was valuable, not just for himself but for others as well. Continuing his walk, Daniel entered a small park that stretched across a quiet part of the city. Children played on swings, couples strolled along the paths, and elderly people sat on benches enjoying the sun. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost like a sanctuary in the midst of a busy city. Daniel found a spot on the grass to sit and reflect further. He remembered the first officer's words about responsibility and cooperation. They had stayed calm, never raised their voice, and had given him clear instructions. That calm authority had made a lasting impression on him. Daniel realized that respect worked both ways. If he respected the officers and rules, he could enjoy his visit safely and even earn the respect of others around him. While sitting in the park, Daniel saw a situation that reminded him of his own experience. A young child had wandered too close to a small fountain, and a security guard approached gently, guiding the child back to a safe area. Daniel noticed that the guard didn't scold the child harshly. Instead, they spoke calmly and explained why the rules existed. The child listened carefully and followed the instructions. Daniel thought about the similarities between the guard's actions and what he had experienced earlier. Authority, when exercised with calmness, clarity, and respect, was not something to fear. It was a guide, a support system that helped people stay safe and maintain order. This understanding deepened his respect for the officers and the way the city functioned. After some time, Daniel stood up and continued walking, feeling more confident in his ability to navigate the city responsibly. He stopped at a small bookstore, browsing through travel guides and local stories. The shopkeeper greeted him politely, and Daniel remembered to speak courteously in return. He asked for directions to a nearby historical site, listening carefully to the shopkeeper's instructions. Unlike before, he was patient, attentive, and cooperative. As he made his way toward the historical site, Daniel reflected on the concept of learning through experience. The morning's encounter had been stressful, but it had been necessary for him to truly understand how to behave as a visitor. He realized that travel was not just about sightseeing. It was about observing, adapting, and respecting the people and environment around him. Along the way, Daniel noticed more officers patrolling the streets, their presence calm yet authoritative. He observed how they interacted with locals and tourists alike, helping those who needed directions, guiding people gently, and maintaining order without creating fear. This reinforced his understanding that rules were not arbitrary. They existed to ensure safety and harmony for everyone. By the late afternoon, Daniel reached the historical site. The building was grand, with intricate designs and a rich history that drew visitors from around the world. He walked slowly, taking in every detail, this time with a sense of reverence rather than just excitement. He remembered to follow the posted guidelines, not taking photos where it was prohibited and speaking quietly around others who were visiting. While exploring the site, Daniel noticed a small group of tourists arguing with a local guide. They were frustrated and loud, not understanding the rules of the place. Daniel approached them politely and shared his own experience from earlier in the day. He explained how following instructions and respecting local customs made the visit safer and more enjoyable. The tourists listened, and one of them nodded appreciatively. "Thanks, I wish we had known this before," they said. Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He realized that not only had he learned from his mistakes, but he could also help others learn and avoid unnecessary trouble. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Daniel walked back toward his accommodation. He felt a deep sense of reflection and gratitude. The morning's encounter had been challenging, but it had transformed the way he viewed the city, authority, and responsibility. He had gained more than just memories. He had gained understanding and maturity. Before entering his building, he glanced back at the streets, the officers, and the city that had taught him so much. He realized that respect and cooperation were the keys to enjoying not just a city, but the world. He understood that being mindful of rules and the impact of his actions could make a difference in creating a safe and pleasant environment for everyone. As he closed the door behind him, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would continue to explore, to learn, and to enjoy, but always with respect, awareness, and responsibility. The lessons of the day had left a lasting impression, one that would guide him through the rest of his journey and beyond. That evening, as he wrote in his notebook, he reflected on the events of the day. He described the officer's calm authority, the lessons about respect, and the importance of being a responsible visitor. He realized that these experiences were far more valuable than any photograph or souvenir. They were lessons in life, understanding, and maturity. Daniel finally set his notebook aside, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The city had tested him, challenged him, and taught him important truths. He was no longer just a tourist. He was a traveler who understood that respect, responsibility, and awareness were essential for any journey. He looked forward to the next day, curious about what he would see and learn, but confident that he now had the tools to navigate the city with care, respect, and understanding. The afternoon had transformed him, preparing him for the experiences ahead and shaping the story of his journey in ways he could never have imagined. The next morning, Daniel woke up feeling more confident than the day before. He had learned a lot about respect, rules, and behavior in a foreign city, and he was determined to explore responsibly. The sun was just rising, casting soft golden light on the streets, and the city was slowly waking up. Vendors were opening their shops, people were walking to work, and the quiet hum of daily life filled the air. Daniel decided to visit a popular market he had heard about from locals. The market was known for its colorful stalls, fresh produce, and handmade crafts. Tourists loved it, but it was also a place where rules were important. Certain areas were off-limits, some products required permission for photography, and traffic through the narrow lanes needed to flow smoothly for safety. As he entered the market, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He moved slowly, taking in the vibrant colors of fruits, vegetables, textiles, and pottery. He made sure to follow the paths carefully and watched for signs indicating restricted areas. He even remembered the lesson from the officers about respecting space and people around him. Daniel noticed that other tourists were behaving differently than he had on his first day. Some were loud, ignoring the rules and blocking the narrow pathways. They jostled with locals and made the shopping experience difficult for everyone. Daniel felt a twinge of concern, knowing exactly how the officers would respond if things escalated. He realized that his previous mistakes had given him a clearer understanding of what to do and what not to do. As he moved further into the market, Daniel spotted the same officer from the previous encounter. The officer was walking calmly among the crowd, observing everything, but not interfering unless necessary. Daniel felt a nervous flutter in his chest. He wasn't doing anything wrong, yet the officer's presence reminded him of the importance of following rules at all times. Suddenly, Daniel noticed a commotion near a busy stall. A tourist was loudly arguing with a vendor, demanding permission to take photos of restricted items. The vendor tried to explain politely, but the tourist continued to insist and even raised his voice. A small crowd had gathered, watching the scene unfold. Daniel's stomach tightened. He knew that if the officers were called, the situation could escalate quickly. He took a deep breath and decided to act. Daniel approached the tourist carefully, speaking calmly. "Excuse me," he said, "I've been here before and learned something important. You shouldn't take photos here without permission. The officers take it very seriously and it's better to follow the rules." The tourist looked surprised at first, then laughed. "Oh, come on. It's just a picture. What's the big deal?" he said, shrugging. Daniel remained calm. "I thought the same at first," he explained. "But I learned that even small actions can create problems. If the officers are called, it could lead to serious trouble. Trust me, it's better to follow the rules and avoid the risk." The tourist hesitated, looking around at the crowd and noticing the calm but watchful officers nearby. Slowly, he nodded and lowered his camera. "All right, I guess you're right," he said, a little embarrassed. Daniel felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not only was he practicing what he had learned, but he was also helping someone else avoid mistakes. He realized that responsibility didn't just mean following rules for himself. It also meant guiding others when he could. After the situation settled, Daniel continued exploring the market with renewed awareness. He greeted vendors politely, asked permission before taking photos, and moved carefully through the crowded pathways. Every interaction reminded him of the importance of respect and patience. While walking through the market, Daniel noticed a small group of children playing near a narrow pathway. One child ran too close to a cart full of fragile pottery, and Daniel instinctively stepped in to guide the child safely away. He smiled and gently explained to the child why it was important to be careful. The child listened attentively, and Daniel felt a sense of pride and responsibility. The day continued peacefully until Daniel reached a larger square in the center of the city. The square was popular among tourists and locals alike, and it was known for its historical monuments and open-air performances. Daniel was excited to see it, but he also remembered the lessons of the past 2 days. He walked carefully, observed the rules, and made sure to respect the space around him. As he was taking in the sights, he noticed another tourist behaving disrespectfully, this time by trying to get past a barrier to access a restricted area. Daniel's heart sank. He remembered how serious the officers had been about such actions. The tourist climbed over the barrier, laughing and calling out to friends to follow. Daniel knew he had to do something, but he also knew he had to stay calm. He approached the group and spoke politely. "Excuse me," he said, "this area is restricted. The officers won't allow anyone here. It's better to follow the rules and avoid problems." The tourists laughed and ignored him at first. One of them even waved his hand dismissively, but Daniel didn't back down. "I understand it seems fun, but I've seen what happens when people don't follow the rules. The officers are very serious, and it could lead to serious consequences. Please, step back." The group hesitated as they noticed the officer from the morning approaching. Daniel took a step back as well, knowing that it was not his place to enforce the rules but to guide and warn politely. The officer arrived calmly and addressed the group with authority. "Sir," the officer said, "you are not allowed in this area. You must step back immediately." The tourist laughed nervously, trying to make a joke, but the officer's calm and firm presence left no room for argument. The tourist realized his mistake and reluctantly stepped back, apologizing quietly. Daniel observed silently, feeling a mix of relief and admiration for the officer's professionalism. The incident reminded Daniel once again that respect and obedience were not about fear. They were about understanding, responsibility, and safety. The officers maintained order without aggression, showing that authority exercised calmly could be highly effective. After the incident, Daniel decided to take a quiet seat on a nearby bench. He reflected on how much he had learned over the past 2 days. The morning confrontation, the market guidance, and now this incident in the square had all contributed to his growing understanding of responsibility, respect, and awareness in a foreign environment. He also realized that learning from mistakes was a powerful tool. His own mistakes had taught him more than any guidebook or online article could. He understood that every interaction, every decision, and every observation could shape his experience and the way others perceived him. As he watched the sun slowly dip toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the square, Daniel felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had faced challenges, learned important lessons, and applied them to help others as well. His journey was no longer just about sightseeing. It was about understanding, growth, and respect. Before leaving the square, Daniel noticed a small group of locals performing a traditional dance. He watched quietly, respecting the space around them, and even joined the small audience at a safe distance. He clapped politely, smiled, and enjoyed the performance without disrupting it. This simple act reinforced his understanding of observing, respecting, and enjoying culture responsibly. As evening approached, Daniel made his way back to his accommodation, reflecting on the events of the day. Each encounter had taught him something valuable: how to handle mistakes, how to guide others gently, and how to respect rules and authority without fear. He knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him long after his trip. Daniel realized that respect, responsibility, and awareness were universal values, essential not just for visiting this city, but for life in general. As he settled into his room that evening, he opened his notebook and wrote about the day's experiences. He described the market, the square, the respectful guidance he had offered to others, and the calm authority of the officers. Each word reinforced the lessons he had learned and reminded him to carry these values forward. Daniel finally closed his notebook and looked out the window at the glowing city. The streets were quieter now, but the lessons of the day echoed in his mind. He had grown more aware, more responsible, and more respectful. The journey was still far from over, but he knew he was prepared to continue exploring with care, understanding, and mindfulness. That night, Daniel drifted to sleep with a sense of accomplishment and reflection. He had faced challenges, learned important lessons, and seen how respect and responsibility could transform experiences. The city had tested him, but it had also guided him, leaving an impression that would shape not just his visit, but his approach to travel and life, forever. The morning of Daniel's final day in the city began with a quiet sense of anticipation. Unlike the first day, when he had rushed from one place to another without thinking, today he planned to move slowly, observe carefully, and enjoy his surroundings with mindfulness. The city was alive with people, vendors setting up their stalls, children walking to school, and tourists like him beginning their day of exploration. Daniel decided to revisit the square where he had experienced the morning confrontation on his first day. He wanted to see it again, not just as a tourist, but as someone who had learned to understand the city's rules, its culture, and its people. The square, now bathed in soft sunlight, looked even more impressive than he remembered. The monument stood tall and proud, and the flow of people was orderly and calm. As he walked through the square, Daniel noticed the officers patrolling as usual. This time, he didn't feel nervous or anxious. Instead, he felt a sense of respect and appreciation. The officers were calm, professional, and attentive, ensuring that the square remained safe for everyone. Daniel realized that their presence was not meant to intimidate but to guide and protect. While walking, he noticed a group of tourists approaching a restricted area. They seemed unaware of the rules, laughing and trying to take photos despite the signs. Daniel felt a familiar tension in his chest, but remembered the lessons he had learned over the past few days. He approached the group cautiously, speaking in a calm and friendly voice. "Excuse me," he said politely, "this area is restricted. The officers are very serious about it. It's better to follow the rules so you don't get into trouble." The tourists paused, looking at him curiously. One of them laughed nervously and said, "We didn't know." "Thanks for telling us." Daniel smiled. He felt a quiet satisfaction in being able to share his experience and guide others without conflict. It reminded him that learning from mistakes was not just about personal growth, it could also help others avoid difficulties. As he continued walking, Daniel noticed the square becoming busier. Street performers entertained crowds, children played nearby, and vendors sold snacks and souvenirs. Despite the activity, the environment remained orderly. Daniel realized that the city's rules were the foundation of this harmony. Respect, responsibility, and awareness allowed everyone, locals and tourists alike, to enjoy the space safely. Daniel decided to take a short break on a bench to reflect on his journey. He thought about how much he had grown since the first morning, when his careless actions had created tension. He remembered the officer's calm authority, the lessons in the market, and the guidance he had given to other tourists. Each experience had shaped his understanding of respect and responsibility. While sitting on the bench, Daniel noticed a small incident. A young child had wandered too close to a busy pathway, and a security guard gently guided them back to safety. Daniel observed how calmly and respectfully the guard handled the situation, without raising their voice or creating panic. He thought about the similarities between the guard and the officers he had encountered earlier. Both had shown that authority exercised with calmness and clarity could be far more effective than anger or aggression. The incident reminded Daniel that respect and understanding were not one-way streets. People needed to follow rules not only for their own safety, but also to ensure the well-being of others. Daniel felt a sense of maturity and awareness that he hadn't had when he first arrived in the city. He realized that travel was not just about visiting new places, but also about learning how to interact respectfully within them. After a while, Daniel decided to continue exploring. He walked through narrow streets, visited small shops, and observed the daily life of locals. Everywhere he went, he remembered to be polite, patient, and considerate. He asked for permission before taking photos, avoided loud behavior, and carefully followed posted instructions. Each small action reinforced the lessons he had learned over the past few days. As he approached a large historical building, Daniel noticed a group of tourists struggling to understand the rules. They were blocking a pathway and speaking loudly, confusing the locals and other visitors. Daniel approached them, speaking calmly. "Excuse me," he said, "this pathway is restricted. It's important to follow the rules here so everyone can enjoy their visit safely." The tourists looked surprised at first, then nodded and moved aside. One of them said, "Thank you for helping us." "We didn't realize." Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. He realized that part of being a responsible traveler was helping others understand the importance of respect and awareness. Daniel entered the historical building, carefully observing the guidelines for visitors. He noticed how respectful everyone was, speaking quietly, keeping a safe distance from exhibits, and following instructions from guides. The environment was peaceful, allowing people to learn and enjoy without disruption. Daniel felt a sense of connection to the city and its culture, appreciating the order and respect that made such experiences possible. While exploring the building, Daniel overheard a conversation between a local guide and a group of tourists. The guide explained the importance of following rules and respecting the space. Daniel realized that these lessons were not only for safety, but also to preserve the history and culture of the place. He felt grateful for the guidance he had received from the officers and for the lessons he had learned firsthand. After leaving the building, Daniel walked toward a nearby park. The park was filled with people enjoying the afternoon, families, students, and elderly couples. Daniel sat on a bench and observed the harmony around him. Children played safely, cyclists followed paths carefully, and people spoke quietly, respecting the shared space. As he sat there, Daniel reflected on his journey. He thought about how much he had changed since his first morning. He had learned to observe, to listen, and to follow rules without hesitation. He had learned that respect and responsibility were not limitations, but tools to enjoy life safely and meaningfully. Suddenly, Daniel noticed the same officer approaching. The officer walked calmly, observing the surroundings, but stopped briefly to acknowledge Daniel. This time, Daniel didn't feel nervous. Instead, he felt a sense of mutual respect. The officer's presence reminded him of the lessons he had learned and reinforced the importance of following rules and behaving responsibly. The officer nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that Daniel had understood the message. Daniel smiled back, realizing that he had grown from a careless tourist into a thoughtful visitor who respected the city, its people, and its rules. As the sun began to set, Daniel decided to take one final walk through the city streets. The glow of the evening light made the buildings and monuments appear even more beautiful. He moved carefully, observing the flow of people, the work of the vendors, and the presence of officers maintaining order. Every detail reminded him of the lessons he had learned and the growth he had experienced. Daniel stopped at a small cafe to enjoy a cup of tea. He sat quietly, watching the city around him. Tourists and locals mingled peacefully, each person following the rules and respecting the space around them. Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that his journey had been more than sightseeing. It had been a journey of understanding, growth, and respect. He opened his notebook and wrote about the day's experiences, reflecting on the lessons he had learned over the past few days. He described the encounters with officers, the guidance he had offered to other tourists, and the moments of reflection in the market, square, and park. Each entry reminded him of how much he had grown and how meaningful the lessons had been. As evening turned to night, Daniel walked back to his accommodation one last time. The city was quiet now, with only a few people walking the streets. He looked around, appreciating the order, respect, and harmony that allowed everyone to enjoy the city safely. He realized that his experiences had transformed him into a traveler who understood the importance of mindfulness, responsibility, and respect for others. Before going to bed, Daniel reflected one last time on his journey. He realized that travel was not just about visiting new places, but about learning how to interact respectfully within them. He thought about how the lessons he had learned in the city would guide him not only in future travels, but also in life. Daniel drifted to sleep that night with a sense of fulfillment and wisdom. He had faced challenges, learned important lessons, and applied them responsibly. He had grown from a careless and unaware tourist into a thoughtful and respectful traveler. The city had taught him the value of rules, respect, and awareness, and these lessons would stay with him forever.